Hello, and so glad you could join me for Chapter 6 of the Dialogues. We're talking about the body and the elevation of form, which is a very interesting topic to all of us who are having this experience of form. So let's find out what this is all about. So the lesson begins by saying we know that the ego does not continue, but the body does continue. So just as a reminder, you may feel like, well, I wish the ego didn't continue, but I still have all of these separated thoughts. But remember that the ego is actually the idea that I'm this temporal being who dies and is born and is restricted to this experience. I'm this body, I'm this mind. So the fact that you are now aware of the fact that you're way more than that and there's a lot more going on means that the whole idea of an ego as being I'm separate and I'm this small little thing that's a victim of the universe isn't there any longer, which means that the ego isn't going on any longer. But the body does continue, which I remember when I first started working with A Course in Miracles years ago. That was one of the biggest fears for me, that if I became realized, I would just melt into the great ooze of the one and would cease to exist. And of course, that brought up a lot of fear. But as we can see, that isn't what happens, because even teachers who have become what we call fully realized still exist in form. So whatever is happening here, the form experience continues. So we need to come to terms with that and figure out where that fits in the experience that we're having. So then the text tells us that the more intimate you become with the self, the less comfortable you may be with the body. And I think that this is just kind of a repercussion of recognizing that I am not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not this limited being, but yet here it is. What do I do with it? So what is needed now is a new way of seeing the body and its service to you. So just like everything else that we're experiencing in this world of form, we need a new translation in order for it all to fall into place for us and to work harmoniously. So we're told in verse 6, and I apologize for condensing this, it was just too long and I wanted to get all these points in. So the body exists as living form. And then he says, everything that exists in form is of the same source. There are the seeds of the truly real, or the energy of creation, in everything that exists in form. So whereas we may formally have thought of the whole earthly form experience as being a mistake, this completely denies that. And we also thought of it as being an illusion. And when it comes to the idea of perception, it is an illusion. But within this dream that we are having are the seeds of what is truly real, which is consciousness, which is another name for, of course, source. And we're using words to describe these things. And so basically what this verse is telling us is that consciousness itself created this experience out of itself. So when I look at this pen or this hand, then there's a recognition that consciousness, that energy of creation, is present in everything that I experience and everything I perceive. So it's not a mistake. It's an intentional act of creation that consciousness entered into. So it kind of made it out of itself. And it's your perception that creates rigidity and assigns meaning. What isn't real are the systems that were made. Okay, let me back up just a minute. So the reason why our perception had to create these rigid systems is before we recognized that we were more than just an individual being with a lifespan who was a kind of a victim of the world that it saw. Before we saw through that and recognized that that wasn't true, we had to function on this level. And the only way that we could function was by trying to make sense of everything that was happening. And when we thought that we were a separate, finite being, then we had to assign meaning to what was happening in order to have a ground from which to operate. But out of that, then, we created these systems that were made, and they're not real. And the systems are actually like perceptions that have been formed into a belief system, like justice, government, corporations, economics, science, and there are lots more. And you think that these systems govern you, but they're not real. They're just a group of perceptions that we constructed into a belief system so that we could feel somewhat safe in this world. So out of this, we had this if this then that world. If this happens, then that's going to happen. So there was some surety, some feeling of security in the world that we were experiencing. So scientists look for natural laws to make sense of the world. It was really helpful for us to believe in these natural laws. And this was the easiest way to learn because it seemed to provide proof. Once you have evidence, you can tuck that away, and that's how that operates. And I can be assured of that. Yet, we've seen that even science can prove or disprove practically anything. 1 week, this particular food plan creates weight loss, and then 2 months down the road, oh, that was wrong, now this does. Or years ago, the world was flat and they had proof. And then now the world is round and we have proof. And you can go throughout science and realize that it's not static. That proof, that evidence changes all the time. And as long as you continue this attitude about the body and the systems of the world, in other words, it's a finite thing, I've got it explained, this is my belief system, that book is closed. And as long as you leave the book closed on that, you will continue to be bound by them. So the laws of God, or natural laws, are way more open than that. And so let's take a look at those. So the first is that there's a series of infinite relationships, or we call it unity, we call it love, we call it consciousness. But these infinite relationships are about the fact that here is consciousness having this experience in form, and everything that it interacts with, it's in relationship with. Because what is the seed under every other thing, every phenomenon, every experience? It's also consciousness. So you have consciousness in relationship with consciousness, while consciousness is manifesting in different ways. And this is the whole impulse of creation. So there's not a separation. Before, it felt like we were separate, and that's that over there, and that's over there, and this is happening to me. And as we discover more and more, we come to a deeper recognition of like, oh, so this is just the basic energy of creation, which I am, that is interacting with other manifestations of the same energy. So then it goes on to relationships are based on harmony and cooperation. So if you recognize that first point, that everything that I encounter is actually a manifestation or an expression of the same consciousness that I am, why would I not be in harmony and cooperation with that? And that comes from a trust in what I call divine flow, that the whole thing is exactly as it needs to be. And then the other natural law is the pattern of discovery. And you've encountered this before, but this is this is the new replacement for the time of learning. We look to see what is actually true here now. And this requires openness to something new. If you've already decided what that experience is or decided how that works, the mind is closed. There is no openness to discover. The Buddhists call it beginner's mind. So we try to cultivate living in a state of beginner's mind so that we can actually discover what's real instead of being attached to old belief systems that we needed to make sense of our experience here. And then the idea, of course, that giving and receiving are one, which, again, referring back to that first concept, the infinite relationships, once that recognition that consciousness is actually manifesting in all different expressions in your experience, then the idea of giving and receiving as one is automatic, because that is me. I'm giving to me and I'm receiving as me. There is no separation. How can it not be one? So moving on then back toward the body. Verse 14. If you continue into the new with your old ideas about the body, the old body will be what you carry into the new with you. So let us begin with the suspension of belief in what you think you know about the body. So, in other words, just like the beliefs about everything else that we decide this is the structure that I'm going to abide by, then the same thing happens with the body. We have certain rules and laws about the body that we've accepted as being true. And as we accept those and abide by those, then we carry that whole belief system with us. And there's more than that. So verse 15 tells us, creation of the new will be predicated on the discovery of what you previously did not know. This will not happen if you cling to known truths. Revelation cannot come to those who are so certain of what is that they cannot allow for the new to be revealed. So that is a reiteration of what we were just talking about, discovery in the open mind. So this is hard to do with the body. I'll admit that, because we have functioned from within these bodies and we're pretty attached to our beliefs about them. But let's look at them a little closer. And it says, calling what you think you know into question will allow real certainty to come. So just even questioning that belief allows revelation of the truth to come to you. So looking at some of the old ways that we used to believe, and these are taken from the text. Formerly, if you follow nutritional and exercise guidelines, then you will have good health. Formerly, if you expend energy, then you will need food and rest. Formerly, if you live long in this body, then it will wear out and die. Formerly, if you smoke, then you will die sooner. So these are just, actually these may not have been, these were formed around what was in the text. But these are things that we pretty much all accept as being accurate. And this isn't saying that your experience is going to be different from this. This is saying, let all of those ideas go and allow yourself to discover what's true in every moment. So even though we have plenty of examples where these laws didn't apply, such as, someone who smoked all his life and lived to be 110, or someone who ate junk and has been very healthy their whole lives. Even though we have examples of those, we consider them flukes or miracles. And we try to follow these natural laws in order to better our odds against the external force we call fate. And this seems just matter of fact to us because we've been following this for so long. But this chapter is really seeking to challenge your perception of that. Not to give you a new belief system. See, this is where the danger lies. You don't want to come up with a new belief system. You just want to drop all belief systems and find out. Allow it to be revealed. So it just talked about fate, and it's important to look at what fate is a system to. Most of us have believed in some form of fate. But it's a misrepresentation of the true internal idea of life's grand design that has been externalized to promote victimization and powerlessness. It's blamed for everything you don't understand or seems out of your control. So this is one of the things that we did. We formed a belief system to help us feel safe. So there was an internal idea, a recognition that life has a grand design, and that we as differentiated, individualized beings don't seem to be in control. And that idea is true. But we took the seed of that idea and misinterpreted it to be like, I'm a victim of this and I'm powerless here. And came up with the thought system of fate and the belief in fate. And then anything that happens that, this happened to me, I didn't have any control over it, that's just fate. I am a victim. So there's an explanation. But verse 21 tells us, as a non-learning being, you are now called to accept that you no longer need this type of learning device and to realize it will no longer serve you. So you don't need to have systems and beliefs in place. In fact, they're holding you back. So let's get back to the body. What is the body designed for? It is the form that is now serving to represent the truth of who you are in the world of form. So it's like a communication device. It's a representation. It's not who you are, but it represents who you are while you're in form. And it is also the vehicle that allows you to experience relationship. So even though, as we go back to the concept of consciousness being present in every expression, without being in a body, we wouldn't have the experience of being in relationship with every other manifestation, every other expression. And that's what consciousness wanted, to experience relationship. That's what we're here for. And the body is a tool for us to be able to have that experience. So verse 25, the ego narrowed your ideas of what the body was here to learn to ideas of survival. You thus learn to survive rather than to live. And I think we can all agree with that. That was the objective. But as you move from the time of learning into the time of acceptance, accept that Christ consciousness dwells within the form of the body. So that concept we were talking about, that it's consciousness manifesting itself. And it's there in your body. Consciousness created your body out of itself. And the indwelling Christ lives in harmonic relationship with the divine flow of life. So now we're not just surviving. Actual living means that we're open to this divine flow of expression and relationship that happens in the world of form. And when you're open to that flow, life is a wonderful, never static thing. So that's where we're moving. Verse 26. Now that your self has joined the elevated self of form, so self meaning consciousness has joined the elevated self of form, you exist together both in time and outside of time. Remember, the elevated self of form will never be all that you are. You are whole once again, and your form will merely represent one aspect of your wholeness in the field of time. So it's not as if you're re-entering form and still completely identified as being just whatever's in this form. Even the human experience you're having, even as you become more and more conscious, it's not going to be all of who you are. And that's the way it's set up, and there's no reason to have a problem with that. The state of form and the state of unity are both in existence right now, which is how this whole thing can happen, that we can be conscious while we're still apparently having this experience of form. Your true self is aware of the self of form and is participating in its experiences and feelings. The self of form, however, exists in time and may need time to realize itself. So to me, this speaks to the part of us that says, wait, I'm not going to claim to be that yet. There's way too much going on here that's still dysfunctional for me to claim to be this exalted self. But it's just showing us that there's a part of you that's been aware all along of what's been happening and has been supporting you and rejoicing in the experience. And now the more your ego and your sense of separated self gets out of the way, the more consciousness you're able to bring into your experience of form. So the true self is able to have a fuller experience that's unimpeded by this small concept, this small level of consciousness. But it's okay that if you need time, because it's a divine plan. So if there's time needed, then that's part of the divine plan, and nobody needs to have a problem with that. Verse 28, time is needed now only for the transformation of the self, which notice the lowercase, the separated self, from a learning being to a being that can accept shared consciousness of unity and begin to discover what this means. So it's one thing to talk about the fact that, consciousness is in every experience and every expression, and it's quite another to know it through having the experience of relationship with everything that happens in your experience. And that's okay. Time is needed for that. And so time is here. Time is created for that, and it's in the divine plan, and there's no problem with it. But isn't it wonderful that you're on this path and you're bringing more and more consciousness to your experience and letting go of more and more of the belief structures that have kept you bound to the world of illusion. So that's where we are now. I appreciate your time and attention and the support that I've received, and I look forward to sharing with you again in the next chapter.